Remote viewing is a term that describes a unique form of psychic ability where a person, known as a viewer, can seemingly perceive information about a distant or unseen object, location, or event without using their normal senses or any physical connection. The concept is often linked to extrasensory perception, a type of sixth sense. The idea that someone could gather information using only their mind fascinated many people, including scientists, military officials, and intelligence agencies during the 20th century. One of the most famous organizations to explore this idea was the Stanford Research Institute. In the 1970s, SRI became a hub for government-funded research into psychic phenomena, especially remote viewing. The program was driven by the belief that if psychic abilities were real, they could potentially be used to gather intelligence, especially during the Cold War when the US government was deeply concerned about the Soviet Union. The SRI remote viewing program became known for conducting some of the most rigorous scientific experiments on psychic phenomena, blending elements of the paranormal with cutting-edge scientific research. Remote viewing wasn't just science fiction or the stuff of fantasy. It was taken seriously by military and intelligence organizations such as the CIA, the US Army, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. The goal was simple: determine whether remote viewing could be a reliable tool for national security. The research program at SRI ultimately led to what became known as the Stargate project, a secret government effort to utilize psychic abilities for intelligence purposes. Remote viewing as an idea didn't appear out of thin air. It is part of a much larger field of research into psychic phenomena that dates back centuries. From ancient prophets to 19th century spiritualists, people have always been curious about the possibility of seeing beyond the physical world. But it wasn't until the 20th century, with the development of modern science, that serious experiments on psychic phenomena began. In the 1930s, Dr. J.B. Rhine at Duke University conducted groundbreaking experiments on ESP, or extrasensory perception. Rhine's studies primarily focused on telepathy, reading someone's thoughts, and clairvoyance, the ability to see things beyond normal sight. Although his results were controversial, they helped establish ESP as a subject worthy of scientific study. By the 1960s, the US government started paying more attention to reports of psychic phenomena, especially as they heard rumors that the Soviet Union was funding its own research into parapsychology, the study of psychic phenomena. This Cold War competition fueled interest in whether psychic abilities could be harnessed as a tool for national security. Enter the Stanford Research Institute, a major nonprofit research center in California. In the early 1970s, SRI scientists Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ became particularly interested in remote viewing. Both men were laser physicists who had a strong interest in consciousness and the mind's potential. They wanted to know if there were a scientific way to investigate psychic abilities, and they believed remote viewing might offer the best chance to prove, or disprove, the existence of those abilities. Their interest aligned with the growing concerns of US intelligence agencies about Soviet parapsychology. If the Soviets were investing in psychic research, could this give them an advantage in gathering intelligence? This fear opened the door to funding for SRI to explore remote viewing, marking the beginning of one of the most intriguing research programs in modern history. To fully understand the significance of the Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing program, it is important to first grasp the concept of remote viewing itself. Remote viewing is not simply a form of guesswork or imagination. It's a technique that attempts to tap into the mind's potential to access information about objects, places, or events that are distant in space and time, without relying on the usual 5 senses. At its core, remote viewing is a type of extrasensory perception where individuals claim to perceive and describe details about a distant or unseen target. The key distinction here is that the viewer does not have any prior knowledge about the target. They are expected to draw information purely through their mental process, often under controlled conditions. This means the viewer might be asked to describe a location or event they cannot physically see or know anything about beforehand, such as a building on the other side of the world, or an event that happened in the past. Remote viewing can be understood as a structured technique in which trained participants focus their mind to retrieve details about distant locations or objects. This is achieved by following a specific process that involves relaxation, visualization, and focusing on impressions or mental images. The process of remote viewing typically involves a viewer and a monitor. The monitor usually has information about the target, but the viewer does not. The monitor guides the viewer without giving away any clues. During the session, the viewer attempts to provide as much detail as possible about the target, which could range from describing a building's layout to identifying an object in a sealed container. Remote viewing isn't simply free-form guessing. It's often approached in a methodical way, with viewers jotting down impressions, sketches, or verbal descriptions as they come to mind. Sometimes these descriptions can be abstract or fragmented, but with proper analysis, they might reveal critical details about the target. For example, a viewer might be asked to describe a hidden location. They may see flashes of shapes, colors, or structures in their mind, which they relay to the monitor. These fragments might include a tall tower, a wide river, or a large expanse of desert. Over time, these pieces of information are cross-checked with the actual location to determine how accurate the impressions were. How is it possible that someone could access information about a place or object without being physically near it? The exact mechanisms behind remote viewing remain a mystery, and several theories have been proposed to explain the phenomenon. One common theory is that the mind has an untapped ability to access a global consciousness or a collective field of information that exists beyond space and time. This idea suggests that consciousness is not limited to the brain, but is a part of a larger interconnected web of knowledge. In this view, remote viewers might be able to tap into this field and retrieve information from it, similar to how a radio tunes into a specific frequency. Another theory relates to quantum mechanics, which suggests that at the smallest level of existence, particles can be interconnected in ways that defy our normal understanding of space and time. Some proponents of remote viewing argue that this quantum interconnectedness might allow for information transfer across vast distances. While these theories remain speculative, they attempt to provide some explanation for the reports of successful remote viewing experiments. However, it's important to note that not all scientists agree on the validity of these theories, and many remain skeptical of remote viewing as a whole. Some of the most well-known experiments in remote viewing took place at the Stanford Research Institute during the 1970s and 1980s. These experiments were led by physicists Paul Puthoff and Russell Targ, who wanted to see if they could prove that remote viewing was a real phenomenon. One of the most famous early remote viewers was a man named Ingo Swann, who participated in several experiments at SRI. In one particularly famous experiment, Swann was asked to describe the planet Jupiter before NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft had reached it. Swann has provided detailed descriptions of Jupiter's atmosphere and physical characteristics, many of which were later confirmed by Pioneer's findings. Although skeptics argue that some of Swann's details were lucky guesses, his accuracy impressed many researchers. Another key figure in remote viewing world was Pat Price, a former police officer who became involved in SRI's remote viewing research. Price was known for his very accurate descriptions of Soviet military installations during the Cold War, despite having no prior knowledge of these locations. His sketches and descriptions were often so precise that they caught the attention of US intelligence agencies, leading to the involvement of organizations like the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency in remote viewing research. These early successes convinced many in the intelligence community that remote viewing could be a valuable tool for gathering information, especially in espionage or military contexts. However, remote viewing remained highly controversial, with critics arguing that the results were often inconsistent and could be explained by chance or subjective interpretation. In controlled experiments, some remote viewers have produced accurate descriptions of distant targets, while others have not. The hit-or-miss nature of remote viewing has led many to question whether it is truly a reliable phenomenon, or whether it can be left to random chance, subjective interpretation, or even fraud. The scientific method relies on repeatability. If a phenomenon is real, it should be possible to reproduce it under controlled conditions. In the case of remote viewing, while some experiments have produced intriguing events, many others have failed to do so. This inconsistency is one of the main reasons why remote viewing is still considered a fringe science by many. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union wasn't only fought with weapons, but also with information. Both nations were engaged in an intense race to gain any advantage, no matter how unconventional. In the early 1970s, reports began surfacing that the Soviet Union was spending millions of dollars on psychic research, including something called remote viewing, the ability to gather information about distant or unseen targets using only the mind. This news caught the attention of the US government, particularly the CIA and other intelligence agencies. The CIA had already been exploring unusual methods of intelligence gathering during the Cold War, including psychological operations, hypnosis, and even drugs like LSD in experiments such as MK-Ultra. But when the reports of Soviet psychic research surfaced, the US saw a potential threat. Could the Soviets really use psychic spies to gain access to US military secrets? This question led to the birth of what would become one of the most intriguing and secretive intelligence programs in US history. In 1972, the CIA decided to fund research at SRI to investigate remote viewing further. This marked the beginning of a long-standing relationship between the intelligence community and SRI. With the backing of the CIA, Puthoff, Targ, and their team began testing other individuals to determine whether remote viewing could be developed into a reliable method of gathering intelligence. One of the most influential figures in the development of the remote viewing program was Swan, who would go on to create the standard protocols that defined how remote viewing sessions were conducted. Swan was not a scientist, but his exceptional abilities and intuitive grasp of psychic phenomena helped shape the entire field of remote viewing. Swan worked closely with Puthoff and Targ to develop a method that could be taught to others. This method involved placing the viewer in a relaxed state and asking them to focus their mind on a distant or unseen location, often with the help of geographic coordinates. The viewer would then describe what they saw or perceived, sketching images or writing down impressions. The results were often surprisingly accurate. In one well-known experiment, Swan was able to describe the location of a Soviet submarine, even though he had no prior knowledge of its existence. These kinds of results excited the CIA, who saw the potential of using remote viewing as a tool for spying on the Soviets and other foreign adversaries. As the CIA's interest in remote viewing grew, so did the scope of the program. Soon the Defense Intelligence Agency, the US Army, and other branches of the military began to take notice. By the mid-1970s, these agencies had also started to fund remote viewing experiments, hoping to use the technique for military purposes. One of the most prominent uses of remote viewing was in locating enemy positions and identifying military targets. The US Army established its own remote viewing unit, known as Project Grill Flame, and began training soldiers to become psychic spies. These individuals, known as remote viewers, were taught how to use Swan's protocols to gather intelligence without leaving the safety of a military base. The idea that soldiers could be trained to use psychic abilities was groundbreaking. For many, it stretched the limits of what was possible, and there was considerable skepticism within the military and intelligence communities. But despite the doubts, the results were compelling enough to keep the funding flowing. As the US government's interest in remote viewing grew, so did the practical applications for this unusual technique. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the program had expanded to include operations aimed at gathering intelligence on foreign targets, and for the first time, remote viewers were being tasked with real-world missions. One of the earliest known operational uses for remote viewing came in 1974, when the CIA tasked the team at Stanford Research Institute with locating a missing Soviet bomber. The bomber had crashed somewhere in Africa, but despite their best efforts, US intelligence agencies were unable to pinpoint the wreckage. The CIA turned to SRI for help, and a remote viewer named Pat Price, who had already demonstrated his remarkable abilities in laboratory experiments, was given the task. Price reportedly described the crash site in vivid detail, even providing information about the surrounding terrain. His descriptions helped narrow down the search area, and the wreckage was eventually found close to the location he had indicated. This success, though somewhat controversial, bolstered the CIA's confidence in remote viewing as a potential intelligence tool. Pat Price's role in the early days of remote viewing cannot be overstated. He was a former police officer with a natural psychic ability, and his work with the SRI team produced some of the most astonishing results in the history of the program. One of Price's most famous achievements involved his remote viewing of a secret Soviet research facility. In the mid-1970s, Price was asked to describe a classified site in the Soviet Union, known only by its geographical coordinates. In his session, Price described a massive underground complex with sophisticated technology, including cranes and other machinery. He even provided the code names for several Soviet projects being carried out at the site. This level of detail was later confirmed by satellite imagery and other intelligence resources, stunning those who had initially been skeptical of Price's abilities. However, Pat Price's career in remote viewing was cut short when he died suddenly in 1975 under mysterious circumstances. His death fueled speculation and conspiracy theories, with some suggesting that he had been targeted by foreign intelligence agencies because of his work.
Indeed, Pat's grave is entirely unmarked. I think he deserves better than that.
As remote viewing began to show promise in operational settings, the US government consolidated its various psychic research efforts under a new program known as Project Stargate. Established in the late 1970s, Stargate brought together remote viewers from different branches of the military and intelligence community. The goal was to formalize and expand the use of remote viewing for intelligence gathering. Stargate was based at Fort Meade, Maryland, and included both military personnel and civilian contractors. The unit was tasked with collecting intelligence on a wide range of targets, from foreign military installations to hostage situations. Remote viewers would sit in quiet rooms, focusing their minds on distant locations and providing descriptions of what they saw. One of the key figures in Project Stargate was Joseph McMoneagle, a former Army officer who became one of the program's top remote viewers. McMoneagle participated in hundreds of remote viewing sessions during his career, and his work earned him a Legion of Merit, one of the US Army's highest honors. He was even credited with helping locate a missing American general during the Gulf War. Throughout the 1980s, remote viewers were tasked with gathering intelligence on Soviet military installations, weapons programs, and other high-priority targets. One of the most ambitious missions involved the Typhoon-class submarines, a new class of ballistic missile submarines being developed by the Soviet Navy. US intelligence agencies had limited information about the submarines, but remote viewers were able to provide detailed sketches of their layout and design, which were later confirmed by satellite imagery. However, remote viewing wasn't always successful. There were numerous instances where the information provided by remote viewers was vague, inaccurate, or simply wrong. In some cases, the viewers' descriptions were so far off the mark that it led to skepticism within the intelligence community. For example, in one of the operations, a remote viewer described a military base in Libya as being covered in snow, something that was obviously impossible given the country's desert climate. Despite the setbacks, the program continued to receive funding, and remote viewers were regularly called upon to assist in intelligence operations throughout the Cold War. While remote viewing produced some impressive results, it was also met with considerable skepticism, both within and outside the intelligence community. Many officials were reluctant to rely on a method that seemed more like science fiction than science fact. There were also concerns about the lack of scientific rigor in the program's protocols, and critics argued that the successes could be explained by chance or coincidence rather than psychic ability. To address these concerns, the CIA and other agencies commissioned a series of scientific reviews. Some of these reviews, conducted by independent experts, concluded that the evidence for remote viewing was weak and that the technique was unreliable as a tool for intelligence gathering. These findings fueled calls to shut down the program, but its supporters argued that even occasional successes justified continued funding. While the Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing program sparked interest and curiosity in scientific and intelligence communities, it was not without its share of controversy and skepticism. As the program grew, so did the voices questioning its validity, scientific rigor, and the potential misuse of government resources. From the beginning, the remote viewing experiments at SRI were met with resistance from the broader scientific community. Many scientists questioned the very foundation of the project, arguing that the concepts of psi, or psychic phenomena, and remote viewing lacked the empirical basis required for serious scientific study. Critics pointed out that remote viewing did not align with the well-established laws of physics, particularly those governing space, time, and energy. They argued that the human mind could not plausibly interact with distant objects or events without any known physical mechanisms to support such claims. Even within SRI itself, there were researchers who were uncomfortable with the institution's involvement in the paranormal. This led to internal debates about the validity of using government funding to explore topics that many saw as pseudoscience. Despite the challenges, SRI's researchers continued to defend the scientific methods they used in their remote viewing studies. They argued that the data they collected demonstrated a statistical significance that could not be dismissed easily, even if the mechanisms behind remote viewing remained unexplained. A major point of criticism against the SRI remote viewing program was the lack of stringent controls during many of its early experiments. Skeptics argue that the experiments were not double-blind, meaning both the participant and the researchers sometimes had information about the target, which could inadvertently influence the results. There were also concerns that the viewers could have been given subconscious clues by experimenters through subtle environmental factors. Critics, such as psychologist Ray Hyman, one of the most vocal detractors of remote viewing, scrutinized the protocols and suggested that flaws in experimental design could explain some of the apparent successes. He pointed out that participants might have received indirect cues or feedback during the sessions, which could skew results. Hyman's critiques led to more careful protocols being established in later experiments, including stronger isolation between the remote viewer and the target selection process.
It's the X-Files in real life, a former top-secret espionage program that was backed by the CIA called Stargate. Recruits used remote viewing, turning themselves into psychic spies. Fox 6 News reporter Kirby Moss joins us with more on one local man who is a firm believer in the novel perceptual discipline.
As news of the remote viewing program spread, mainstream media became increasingly interested in covering what appeared to be a psychic spy program. However, the nature of media coverage often sensationalized the subject, leading to public misunderstandings about what remote viewing really was and what it could do or could not do. Stories often focused on the most dramatic examples, such as the claim that remote viewers could detect Soviet missile sites or locate enemy submarines, even when such cases were isolated and inconclusive. The sensationalism reached a point where popular culture started to exaggerate the role of psychics in national defense, blurring the line between serious research and entertainment. Films, TV shows, and novels began to depict remote viewing as an almost magical ability, far beyond what the actual experiment suggested. This skewed public perception made it harder for researchers to defend their work in serious scientific and government circles. One of the most enduring criticisms of the remote viewing program revolved around the use of taxpayers' money to fund what some believed to be a frivolous or unscientific endeavor. Between the late 1970s and early 1990s, it is estimated that the US government spent millions of dollars on remote viewing projects under various code names, including Project Stargate. Critics, particularly from within the government and the Department of Defense, questioned whether the money could have been better spent on more tangible intelligence gathering methods. While there were some notable successes in remote viewing, such as the apparent identification of Soviet submarine bases, detractors argued that the results were not reliable enough to justify the cost. While remote viewers occasionally produced shockingly accurate results, the overall track record of the program was mixed. For every success, there were multiple instances where the remote viewers were either completely wrong or provided vague, unusable data. Some participants like Swan and Price were celebrated for their exceptional skills, but even their performances were not consistent enough to provide a reliable intelligence tool. The eventual decline and closure of the remote viewing program was a culmination of various factors, including scientific criticism, a shift in political priorities, and the mixed results of the experiments themselves. As the Cold War wound down, the US government's interest in unconventional methods for gathering intelligence, including remote viewing, began to fade. During the height of the Cold War, especially in the 1970s and early 1980s, the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union had fueled an intense drive for technological and intelligence superiority. This included exploring non-traditional methods like remote viewing, which were perceived as potentially giving an edge in espionage. However, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the easing of global tensions, the urgency to pursue speculative intelligence methods diminished. Traditional intelligence methods such as satellite imagery, signal intelligence, and human intelligence had advanced significantly, further reducing the perceived need for programs like Stargate. By the early 1990s, many policymakers and intelligence officers began to see remote viewing as an unnecessary expenditure. Without the existential threat of nuclear war driving the need for innovative approaches, remote viewing became less attractive as a serious tool for intelligence gathering. Another major factor that led to the program's decline was the inconsistency in results. While there were some remarkable successes in remote viewing, such as the identification of specific locations or objects, the overall reliability of the method was questioned. For every accurate hit, there were numerous misses or results that were too vague to be actionable. Intelligence agencies require that data is not only accurate but also reliable and consistent. Even though some remote viewers like Swan and Price produced strikingly accurate results at times, the method never reached a level of consistency that would allow it to be used as a dependable intelligence gathering tool. Many of the results were too ambiguous, with remote viewers often providing general descriptions that could be interpreted in various ways. By the mid-1990s, the political and financial climate was no longer conducive to supporting remote viewing research. The US government had funded the program for over 2 decades, investing millions of dollars into research that ultimately failed to yield a consistently reliable results. As fiscal constraints became more pressing and priorities shifted toward more conventional and proven methods, Stargate found itself at risk. In 1995, the CIA commissioned the American Institute for Research to conduct an independent evaluation of the remote viewing program. Led by statistician Jessica Utz, who was sympathetic to the Psi research, and psychologist Ray Hyman, a vocal skeptic, the report aimed to determine whether remote viewing had any intelligence value. The AIR report, delivered later that year, was a mixed bag. Utz argued that the data collected over the years showed statistical significance beyond mere chance, suggesting that some form of psi phenomenon could be at work. However, Hyman and other critics pointed out that the results were too inconsistent to be of any practical use. They argued that even if remote viewing existed in some form, it did not produce actionable intelligence that could be reliably used in the field. The report's conclusion was that the remote viewing had not provided sufficient value to justify continued government funding. Based on this assessment, the CIA officially closed down the Stargate program in 1995. Throughout its existence, the SRI remote viewing program faced intense skepticism from the scientific community. Prominent critics such as James Randi, a magician and debunker of paranormal claims, frequently called into question the legitimacy of the experiments. Randi and other skeptics argued that the successes in remote viewing could be explained by chance, subtle cues, or flawed experimental design rather than any genuine psychic ability. Critics also pointed out that the results from Stargate and earlier Psi research at SRI often lacked the rigorous controls necessary to rule out alternative explanations. They contended that any extraordinary claims, like those made by remote viewing proponents, required extraordinary evidence, and the evidence presented by the program did not meet that high standard. The criticism was not limited to outsiders. Even within the scientific community interested in Psi research, there were disagreements about the methods and conclusions of remote viewing studies. This division made it harder for the program to gain broader acceptance or support, and over time, these criticisms helped erode confidence in remote viewing's potential. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, internal tensions within the intelligence community and SRI contributed to the decline of the program. Originally, the project had been supported primarily by the Defense Intelligence Agency, with backing from other branches of the military. However, as interest in the program decreased, its management was transferred to the CIA. The move to the CIA was seen by some as final attempt to salvage the program by placing it under a more centralized and higher profile agency. However, the transfer also led to increased scrutiny, both from within the intelligence community and from external auditors. The CIA was known for its more cautious approach to unconventional methods, and many within the agency were skeptical of the program's value. The shift in oversight marked the beginning of the end, as the CIA ultimately commissioned the AIR review that sealed the program's fate. Even after the formal closure of the program, the legacy of remote viewing continued. Some of the researchers and participants, such as Tark Puthoff and Swan, went on to publish books and papers recounting their experiences with the program. These publications kept the subject of remote viewing alive in the public imagination and sparked continued interest in paranormal research. A number of former Stargate participants also continued to practice and teach remote viewing in private settings. Civilian remote viewing groups sprang up, offering courses and workshops for individuals interested in learning the skill. Some of these groups claimed to use remote viewing for practical purposes, such as finding missing persons or predicting stock market trends, though these claims remained unverified. The SRI remote viewing program and later project Stargate officially ended in 1995. Its influence and legacy have endured in various fields. The story of remote viewing has left a lasting impression on popular culture, the paranormal research community, and even the way governments think about unconventional methods of intelligence gathering. Remote viewing quickly became part of popular culture, capturing the imagination of people fascinated by paranormal phenomena and secret government programs. After the declassification of Project Stargate, the story of psychic spies inspired countless books, television shows, and movies. Films like The Men Who Stared Goats brought the topic of remote viewing to a wide audience. Loosely based on journalist John Ranson's book of the same name, the film blends satire with real-life events, poking fun at the military's attempt to harness paranormal abilities, including remote viewing. The cultural fascination with the concept of remote viewing extended beyond The Men Who Stared Goats, influencing a wide range of entertainment media. Numerous documentaries, such as Third Eye Spies, delve deeper into the historical context of remote viewing programs, revealing interviews with key figures such as Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. These documentaries often explored the fine line between scientific inquiry and the paranormal, presenting remote viewing as a bridge between these two worlds. In fiction, television series like The X-Files and Stranger Things also drew upon the idea of psychic phenomena and secret government experiments, reinforcing the public's enduring interest in hidden knowledge and unconventional science. The concept of remote viewing taps into society's curiosity about the untapped potential of human mind, making it an attractive subject for science fiction and conspiracy theories alike. Remote viewing had a profound influence on the field of parapsychology, the study of psychic phenomena. The work done at the Stanford Research Institute provided a sense of legitimacy to remote viewing, as it was backed by scientists and funded by government agencies. As a result, remote viewing became a focal point for researchers interested in psychic abilities such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. The experiments at SRI, particularly those conducted by Ingo Swann and Pat Price, became case studies in parapsychological literature. For decades, parapsychologists have continued to investigate the possibility of remote perception, with organizations like the Rhine Research Center and Institute of Noetic Sciences further exploring these abilities. While mainstream science remains skeptical of the claims made by remote viewers, parapsychologists argue that the anecdotal evidence and statistical data gathered in controlled experiments suggest there may be more to human consciousness than currently understood. While the original government programs were officially shut down, the broader idea of exploring unconventional methods in intelligence and military strategy has not been entirely abandoned. Modern defense agencies have shown interest in exploring cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and neurological enhancements to augment intelligence gathering capabilities. Though remote viewing is no longer a funded program, the work done at SRI highlighted the importance of thinking outside traditional frameworks of intelligence gathering. The interest in non-traditional methods is still alive, with research focusing more on enhancing human performance through science, such as improving cognitive abilities, mental resilience, and pattern recognition. Some theorize that secret government projects may still explore phenomena akin to remote viewing, though no concrete evidence exists to confirm such programs today. The classified nature of intelligence work often leads to speculation about the continuation of such studies behind the scenes. The legacy of the SRI's remote viewing program is both complex and enduring. What began as a classified experiment during the Cold War has evolved into a multifaceted phenomenon that continues to inspire debate, exploration, and fascination. The story of remote viewing challenges the boundaries between science and the paranormal, fact and speculation, skepticism and belief. Whether one views it as a curious chapter in military history or a genuine exploration of human potential, remote viewing has left an unforgettable mark on the way we think about intelligence, consciousness, and the mysteries that lie just beyond our perception. And how about you? You've made it this far, haven't you? Maybe you've had a nagging feeling that remote viewing could be your hidden superpower all along. Sure, you may not crack government codes or locate secret bunkers on your first try, But hey, even the pros had to start somewhere. Why not grab a comfy chair, close your eyes, and give it a go? Worst case, you'll end up locating the remote control you've been missing for days. Best case, well, you may just tap into the secrets of the universe. No pressure, just a little mind travel.